On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
That's what it sounded like in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday night when police arrested the 30-year-old man suspected and charged with murdering two staff members from the Israel embassy in the American capital. And when he was done, you heard him yell, "Free Palestine." The execution of the pair sent shockwaves around the Jewish and Israeli world and in diplomatic circles, too. Missions from Israel are flying their flags at half-mast, and there have been several memorial services and vigils held in Canada by members of the Jewish community. Police forces in Canada are announcing they're beefing up security patrols in Jewish neighborhoods. Prime Minister Mark Carney sent his condolences, called the attack a violent act of anti-Semitism, and pledged to protect the Jewish community in Canada by bringing in bubble legislation and boosting funding for security systems at local synagogues, Jewish schools, and community centers. Some commentators, including Carney, blame the attack on the rampant and toxic anti-Semitic incitement and rhetoric against Jews in Israel. But in Israel, some Knesset members felt that Carney is being a hypocrite. In fact, according to Israel's diaspora minister Amichai Shikli, he took aim directly at Western countries and mentioned Carney specifically, and also the leaders of France and Great Britain, because in recent days, Shikli said, they, quote, emboldened the forces of terror through their failure to draw moral red lines. This cowardice has a price, and that price is paid in Jewish blood. He was referring to that joint communique, which the three nations issued on Monday, May 19th, rebuking Israel's renewed military campaign in Gaza, calling the humanitarian situation in Gaza intolerable, and threatening sanctions for settlements in the West Bank. A diplomatic salvo for which Hamas subsequently thanked Canada, and ever since it seems there have been a series of worrisome developments in Canada's historic good relationship with the State of Israel, including this week when Canada's foreign minister officially summoned the Israeli ambassador to her department to explain why the IDF fired warning shots near a delegation of foreign diplomats, including some Canadians who were touring Jenin in the West Bank, an event the Prime Minister denounced during a news conference.
We expect a full investigation. We expect a immediate explanation of what happened. It's totally unacceptable. It's some of many things that are totally unacceptable that's going on in the region.
I'm Ellin Bessner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Friday, May 23rd, 2025. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Prime Minister Mark Carney's been in office now for just over 3 weeks, but some observers are calling the new Liberal government's diplomatic position and scolding of Israel as a much more forceful position than Canada's taken in years. Before October 7th, it's been nearly 30 years since diplomatic tensions have flared up like this between Canada and Israel. Back in 1997, Canada recalled its ambassador from Tel Aviv after it was discovered that the Mossad used fake Canadian passports in a botched attempt to assassinate a former Hamas leader in Jordan. And summoning an ambassador isn't unheard of in our country's history either, but it usually applies to dictatorships. The envoys from Russia and China were recently summoned to account for themselves about targeted assassinations on our soil and foreign interference. India, too, but summoning the Israeli ambassador, Ido Moed, now was because of this shooting near the diplomats touring Jenin in the West Bank. Canada was part of a wave of countries who summoned their Israeli ambassadors over this incident. So what's behind all of it, including Canada's seemingly harder line policy on Israel? For answers, we turn to Artur Wilczynski. He's a retired Canadian ambassador to Norway, a career diplomat with extensive experience in global affairs Canada, and an expert in international security and intelligence, and he joins me now from Ottawa.
Thanks very much for having me.
Well, we need you because it's been a fraught 3, 4, 5 days, politically, diplomatically, and of course, tragically, our listeners will have followed the horrific murders in Washington. These were diplomatic staff. When a person is part of an ambassador staff or embassy staff, what security measures are in place? Now, of course, Canada is a whole different situation in terms of security when you're abroad with embassies. But in terms of when you go out from the embassy and you're at an event, what is usually in place to protect people?
So it really depends on where you are. So that the security protocols around the world would vary, but security protocols for Israeli diplomatic staff, regardless of where they are undoubtedly very high, given the war in Gaza, given the role that international terrorist organizations play, given the quite frankly the incitement against Israelis and Jews that is taking place around the world. There would have been a very high level of vigilance. So there would have been background kind of briefings on security that are regular and security protocols that embassy staff would have. But I think that it really does also depend on the kind of event that and the location that people are going to. And I think in Washington, for Israeli staff, Washington would have been considered comparatively safe, and that Washington, a Jewish event that wasn't necessarily tied to the embassy would have been one where they would have been advised to be vigilant, because again, all Jewish events are highly securitized these days because of what we talked about, because of the incitement, because of the anti-Semitism, because of the targeting. But there wouldn't have necessarily been an exceptionally high over the baseline for being in public in Washington for Israeli diplomats.
How would they even know that to get these two when there was a whole bunch of Jews there? I don't understand why they picked them.
There's no indication that the perpetrator. I haven't read any indication that the perpetrator even knew that these were individuals affiliated with the Israeli embassy in Washington. It's why I think that this is absolutely, it's an anti-Semitic hate crime at the very least, because this is a person who went to an event at a Jewish museum in Washington, D.C. and opened fire. So it goes to the broader risk and broader threats against all Jewish targets in North America. It's not just about Israelis.
Our listeners and you may have read that the last couple of hours there's been lots of reaction. Israel's diaspora minister directly called out incitement from what Canadian, the UK, and France's statement on the long weekend rebuking Israel and said, this is what you did, which is why our people were killed. How likely is that in security terms that this guy sort of got activated and said, I'm going to go kill somebody because Canada signed a statement?
So I think that that's highly unlikely. I think that there's enough incitement that's been going on over the past number of years, an environment where people shouting, globalize the Intifada, shouting from the river to the sea, targeting Jewish institutions across North America and Europe, going into Jewish neighborhoods. I think it was only a matter of time before that broader incitement that is taking place within the anti-Zionist movement that is the problem. I think that Minister Chikli from Israel is perhaps engaging in a little bit of partisanship and political posturing. There's lots to criticize in terms of the Canadian, French, and British statement, but I think that to lay the blame of these murders on a diplomatic statement issued by three of Israel's friends, to be blunt, I think is inappropriate and is unhelpful on the part of the Israeli minister. Now, again, I go back. There's a lot that needs to be done, and there is a whole lot of incitement taking place against Israelis and Jews in general. And the governments of Canada, the government of France, the government of the UK are all, I think, guilty of not doing enough to tackle the questions of incitement to violence that a lot of these demonstrations and a lot of the hyperbolic criticism of the war in Gaza has engaged in. But the statement itself, I don't think that's relevant. I'd be more interested in the statement that was made by the head of humanitarian affairs of the United Nations that said just a couple of days prior that 14,000 babies were in imminent danger of dying in the next 48 hours. Now, something like that could trigger someone because it was high profile, it was repeated in mainstream media,
but it's not true, as we found out later. It could happen over the next 4 years.
A lie.
Exactly.
It was a lie. Let's not be like, but that. Because I think as a point that could motivate someone who is already predisposed and already radicalized to commit violence.
Okay, so let's talk about that statement. They used the word egregious, intolerable. They also talked balanced about Hamas being a terrorist. They have to lay down their arms, that the heinous crime of October 7th, but they basically threatened sanctions. When you see Canada threatening sanctions and using strong language, this is Carney's first big Middle East policy statement. What do we make of this? How big a pivot is it, or is it more of Trudeau but just doubling down?
No, I actually do think that this is a pivot. I think that this is the current government, the Prime Minister Carney, putting his stamp on aspects of Canadian foreign policy that are more critical of Israel and the Israeli government than Prime Minister Trudeau was. There are a number of reasons behind it. That sort of the relationship that he's trying to foster with France and the UK. The fact, quite frankly, that even the Trump administration is making noises about being more critical of Israeli tactics in Gaza, I think created a more permissive environment for Carney to lean forward in with two of his close global political allies in criticism of the Netanyahu government. The language that was used and sort of the way that that statement was framed, I think, is problematic for all kinds of reasons, and its timing also was not particularly helpful. And the fact that one of the things that for me I think that was also a missed opportunity on the part of the Canadian, British, and French governments was to try and amplify the voices of those Gazans right now that are protesting on the streets of Gaza, not against Israel but against Hamas. And I think that this would have been an opportunity to perhaps behind closed doors tell the Israeli government to, mitigate or try to at least not aggravate certain elements, and to amplify the voices of those Palestinians who want to see Hamas gone, because that's the strategic objective that Israel wants. It's the strategic objective that Canada says it wants, and it's the strategic objective that many of our allies have said it wants. So the fact that it really, that public statement focused exclusively on Israel, or mostly on Israel in that context, I don't think was particularly helpful, and I understand people's deep concern about it.
This came just, let's say, 24 hours before a bunch of diplomats. Walk us through this. How does this happen in Ramallah? You have a big group of 16 or 20 foreign diplomats, locals, and how does this work? They go on a tour with the Ramallah Palestinian Authority. So, isn't this always like completely organized before, security's done before, their route should be... No? How does this work? How could something like this happen?
So the Canadian delegation in Ramallah, we have a head of office in Ramallah. I've visited that office in the past, and sort of the security protocols associated with it are quite stringent. There's always for movements associated within the West Bank are quite structured because there are flare-ups and violence, and we're in a particularly, I think, precarious situation right now where there have been significant flare-ups where these Israeli forces have been going after various terrorist actors in the West Bank, and there's also a general degradation of the security situation. We're also, to be blunt, seeing very problematic activities on the part of some settlers who are committing violence. So I think that
and then the woman who was going to have a baby and she was shot. They were looking for her murderers while they were in there. That's what was going on. So it's like Israel's in the middle of a war effort. And how did these diplomats decide they're going to go on a tour?
So this would have, again, I don't know. I don't have a ton of the specificity of who the approvals were, but it would not surprise me that a visit to certain areas was being organized by the Palestinian Authority, and that this should have been coordinated better with the IDF if they were operating, or with Shin Bet, if folks had deviated from an agreed upon kind of
itinerary,
or if they were going into an area where there were imminent or ongoing operations. Quite frankly, warning shots would have been the most effective way to convey, don't come this way. I hadn't heard any reports that the firing was at the delegation. But again, this is a very, very rough area where diplomats have to be particularly cautious, where we have a duty of care responsibility as the government of Canada to our diplomats to make sure that we don't expose them unnecessarily to harm. I think it's really important for not only the Israelis to tell Canada what it was up to, but for us to understand from the Canadian mission in Ramallah what kind of security measures it took in order to ensure the safety and security of our staff in the middle of this very tumultuous and particularly precarious time in the West Bank.
As a diplomat, though, would you be wearing flak jackets? Would you be wearing helmets? Didn't look like they were.
So again, all of this should be the subject of a security assessment that is undertaken by the mission security officer in partnership with local authorities to understand what the threats and risks are. When we participate in these kinds of multilateral, where there are a number of countries that work together, usually the security officers coordinate amongst themselves to make sure that any kind of intelligence that they have around threats that are in the area, that they are shared, so that there can be also cooperation around mitigating those threats. And if that means wearing a flak jacket, that means wearing a flak jacket and a helmet. It's a rough moment in time in the West Bank, and I think that diplomats have a responsibility to exercise caution, to make sure that they take appropriate risks, and that the risks that they take are commensurate with the benefit that accrues for Canadian foreign policy and for Canadian interests in the region.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
We heard that the Global Affairs Minister has summoned the Israeli ambassador to explain what the heck and was going on. And Mark Carney also said it the other night after a cabinet meeting. What does that mean when you are summoned as a foreign envoy?
No, it's not a good thing. Usually when an official summons is requested, you get a diplomatic note from the foreign ministry requesting your urgent presence at a certain time and place to meet with certain officials. So it's a pretty formal notification. Come here. We're going to have a chat. Usually, like a formal summons that where the statement is issued in public by the head of government, by the prime minister, or by the foreign minister, it's very serious. That's high level, acknowledgement of displeasure. And there's two audiences there. The first audience, and I think the primary audience in that, are Canadians, because I think that Canadians in this case had seen the media reports of what happened, and I think that that this was a political act on the part of the government to convey to Canadians that it was treating this incident where Canadian diplomats were at risk seriously, and so that's why the Prime Minister said it after the cabinet retreat very, very publicly. And again, the way that the Israelis and any diplomat who receives an official summons after an incident like that, they understand that they're going to get a talking to. And what happens behind closed doors really depends how much information was already available to the Canadian sources about understanding the complexity of what happened on the ground and conveying to the Israelis displeasure about certain specific elements. And seeking a more formal explanation of what happened. So that second part of getting an explanation from the Israelis what happened is completely legit. That's an appropriate kind of question to have after members of your diplomatic corps have been exposed to fire. So I don't think that that's necessarily like some kind of egregious violation of principles with our Israeli friends.
But it doesn't mean like they're getting kicked out of Ottawa. Like the Chinese get summoned, then the Russians get summoned, the Iranians, they get summoned, and then they're expelled. So where does this go on the scale now?
Way lower. Way lower. This isn't a declaration of diplomats as persona non grata. This is not around severing ties. This is around formally conveying concern and formally conveying displeasure with a particular situation. It's not about downgrading the relationship. It's not about expelling Israeli diplomats. To expel a diplomat, you would summon an ambassador, and that's part of the process, right? You would summon an ambassador. You'd say, these are the people that we have a problem with. Out you go. Foreign ministries do that on a regular basis. It's part of the process. But the summoning in of itself is not necessarily immediately tied to a declaration of a diplomat as persona non grata and kicking them out of the country.
Okay, so what happens now? You were invited, I was too, so full disclosure, to the Israeli ambassador's Yom Ha'atzmaut party, which they had later. They had it last night. You got to go. He was there. He's not in prison. He's not in jail. He didn't say anything.
He didn't say anything about the summons. I think he did acknowledge that the relationship with Canada right now is not in the best place. He did make reference, quite frankly, but not only to Canada, but in a more general way, that when Hamas, thanks you for a statement that perhaps you're on the wrong side of history, it was a forward-leaning but not offensive, pushback against the Canadian government and the French and the British ones as well. No, but he was there, and I think that there was a big event, and I think that it demonstrated, I think, that there is a broad base of sort of the Ottawa political bureaucratic crowd. There were folks from the Department of Foreign Affairs there, from Global Affairs Canada there. So, and as well as other former colleagues that I have seen. So again, no one's putting the ambassador out the door. I think that again, this is part of the diplomatic theater that is meant to, again, for different audiences. The Israelis will get it in terms of why Canada is concerned, because diplomats were exposed to potential harm, and that is a reason for concern and completely legitimate to convey your concern and to ask for a formal explanation of what happened. But again, I think that the main purpose of it was to speak to Canadians who had seen this repeatedly covered on the news about that Canada was taking this seriously and it was going to step up and defend its public servants and its diplomats posted in Ramallah.
Have we ever called an Israeli ambassador in for consultations in your living memory?
I don't know of it. I don't recall. That doesn't mean it hasn't happened. I think again.
That's why we have ChatGPT. We have to look it up. Listeners, if you know, you know. But I don't remember.
But again, there's a difference. So an ambassador can be called in without it being made public. Okay, so there can, you can have the deputy minister of foreign affairs give a call to the ambassador and say, hey, we want to chat about issue X, Y, or Z, and to convey, views, positive or negative, around a particular stance that a country takes, including Israel. What's I think particularly important in this is that it was something that was said publicly by the prime minister. Now, the number of times that a prime minister says we're calling in a foreign ambassador to have a talking to about something that we're not happy about is truly exceptional. So that is a high level of concern that the government of Canada is publicly conveying to the government of Israel about what it perceives to be a behavior that needs more robust explanation than what's been in the public domain.
Finally, what do we make? What happens? What are you expecting to come next? It's been like nonstop, busy diplomatic news in the last 5 days. Then what? Is there like a timeline for, quote, sanctions that the government is saying that you get 90 days? Because he didn't say anything, Carney, about what the sanctions were or when it would happen.
The question of the potential sanctions or the consequences was linked to what happens next in Gaza in terms of the Israeli plans to retake the Strip and what level of humanitarian assistance Israel allows into Gaza. So I think that a lot depends on how things evolve. Unlike the Brits, who already announced that they are, quote, suspending their free trade discussions with the Israelis, we already have a free trade agreement with Israel. So I've heard nothing about its suspension or any kind of consequences in that space. And I think a lot of factors will go into that, both the reality of Canada's evaluation of its obligations under international law and its view of whether or not Israel is living up to its international obligations, but also the domestic political context as well. I think we can't ignore the fact that Canada, for good or for bad, foreign policy is often an extension of domestic policy, and sort of the way that that's been evolving over time is something that I think is just reality.
And we'll all wait to see, of course, the next steps. And then June is the big high-level meeting in United Nations in New York, where recognizing the Palestinian state will be on the table. And if you read the statement that came out May 19th from Canada, UK, and France, right at the bottom, Canada said in a separate sentence, and recognizing the Palestinian state, if that helps, which everybody has kind of ignored. But that was in there right at the last sentence. And that's new because they couldn't get it through March 18th. Last year, everyone tried to get it through Parliament, and the Liberals went, whoa. So they stopped it. They made an agreement. You know where I'm talking about, right? But it's in there. So they didn't talk about that. That's our last thing. What does this mean now? Is Canada now going to move because they're friends with France and England now, and France and England are going to recognize unilaterally? So it's very interesting. Like,
it is very, and it's also, so again, one has a hard time telling, but Trump has also started speculating about the recognition of a Palestinian state, and I think Israelis need to pay attention to that. I think that it's been the Canadian government position for many, many years around the establishment of a two-state solution. So this is not new. The question becomes whether or not this recognition of the Palestinian Authority as the de facto government of the state of Palestine, that it will now be recognized as an independent state, whether or not that will help advance the talks or not. The Israelis are clear in saying that they believe that it's a reward for October 7th and that should not happen. There are others that say that you need some kind of disruptive action to actually push the Israeli government. That has not been particularly helpful. And again, full disclosure, I find the current Israeli government deeply, profoundly problematic. It has not helped itself. It has not helped achieve any of the strategic outcomes that it says it's had for almost, a year and 9 months now since the.
Well, hold on. We don't have to go into the debate. debate, but they did get home 148 hostages out of almost 200, and some are.
But they also said that the main objective was to remove Hamas, and they haven't done that. And the cost has been spectacular. And there still are, 50 Israelis dead and alive that are being held captive by Hamas. So it's a year, 9 months. I'm not saying that nothing's happened, but when they've actually succeeded in getting folks out, a lot of that has been not based on military action.
It's based on negotiations with Qatar and right.
Correct. All I'm saying is that the Israeli government does need a kick in the pants, in my opinion, in order to revisit both its strategy and its tactics, because it has been less than successful, and number one, in preventing the most horrific attack in Israeli history, and has been less than effective in actually meeting its strategic objectives that it set out for itself. So I think Israelis need to understand, and the Israeli government needs to understand, that sometimes its friends are criticizing it, even though we might share the same overall strategic objectives.
This is like a big intervention when nothing else works, and the Trump plan is like a Hail Mary. This is a Canadian intervention when they think this is the only thing that we can do, maybe.
Well, we have to, again, countries are going to do what they perceive to be in their national interests. Canada has to do what it thinks is right for Canada, and that's complex. Canada is hosting the G7 in a few weeks in June. So you were asking what is an important time frame? That is a very important time frame, because that might intersect with what is what might be an amplification of hostilities in Gaza, and so the G7. Based on what's going on in the Middle East, might also be compelled, to take more, vocal action. And you're going to have folks like France and the UK, the US, Italy, and Germany, who are going to have, I think, fairly strong views. Whether or not they can reach consensus is going to be interesting. And Trump is always going to be the wild card, right? A $400 million gift from Qatar is always buys
a lot of
tries to be quite incentivizing for the president of the United States.
Right, because it's just been head spinning in the last few days.
It is. I think what's made it all the more, difficult for many members of our community was what happened in Washington. Those murders, I think, send a shockwave through the community around the world, and I think it just validates all of our concerns about our safety and security, and all of us are sort of thinking, there for the grace of God go I. Any one of us could be attending one of these events that are sponsored by the community, and
Walk for Israel in Calgary and Toronto,
going to the Jewish Museum, going to Shul, walking into a school. All of these things have become acts of faith, if you pardon the analogy, by members of the community, and we all, I think, collectively feel let down by all levels of government in this country, that we have not received the level of protection that we deserve and that we need. That's why we hope that the government of Canada will step up and address the rhetorical incitement that's out there, because people need to understand that incitement to violence is real and has real consequences, and that's why it's already criminalized, and we want them to enforce the law, and asking for folks to enforce the law shouldn't be too much.
We'll see what happens now after this. Really, really great to speak to you, and I'm going to have you back. Bye. And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Gronowski Gluskin Charitable Foundation. If you're in Toronto on Sunday, or you're coming to Toronto March 25th for the Walk for Israel, come on out and say hello at our booth at the after party. Meet your favorite CJN podcasters, and me too, and journalists. Grab some free giveaways and enter our contest for a chance to win cash prizes. It's for new subscribers. I'll be there. I'll look forward to meeting you. And you'll also get to meet some of our staff, including Zachary Kauffman, our show producer, Andrea Varsany, the executive producer, Michael Fraiman, and our music is by Dov Beck-Levine. Thanks for listening.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, Not Long Ago, Not Far Away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.